There's a saying that energy efficiency is a bit like it's like picking money up off the floor. You just pick the money up off the floor. Yep, that's that easy. That's how easy it is to save energy. And that's all I need to do. The energy audit's going to tell me how to pick that money off the floor. Gosh, I want an energy audit. Not true. Not true. Yeah, you're going to have to spend money, wastage that the energy audit identifies. Yep, some of that could be quite expensive to fix. That's that clients actually implement. Are you really are you tired of spending days or weeks poring over energy audit data, only to have your clients ignore your recommendations or struggle to understand the advice that you're providing? You're not alone. Many energy advisors and consultants face this frustrating challenge, and this occurs in every country in the world. So as energy efficiency professionals, we invest significant time and effort into collecting and analysing data, identifying energy savings opportunities, and developing energy savings recommendations. But let's face it, if our clients aren't using the insights that we've provided, are we really making a meaningful impact? And the answer, of course, to that is no. So what goes wrong? Is it the data ourselves? Is it our energy audits? Is it how we present it? At a simplistic level, you could blame the clients and you'd be right. You've done your job. It's up to the client now. And you might even choose some choice adjectives when describing the client who isn't following your great advice. But if you step back a bit, it's actually not that simple. And in actual fact, you probably actually have a lot more influence than you think you do in order to influence the outcome. And that's what I want to cover in this video. Firstly, I'm going to identify why energy audits don't get implemented, and then I'm going to go into the solutions. I'm Bruce Rouse from the Sustainability Education Academy. Most of my career has been in energy efficiency and in undertaking energy audits. So now let's get started. Now, energy audits have a shockingly low implementation rate. There's a study, I believe, out of the US, I identified, but I can give you other examples. I think it's from New York, where only 50% of audits had measures implemented in them. Here in my own state of Victoria, here in Australia, I know that the state government has supported, funded or subsidised many energy audits. And I know recently, or a few years ago, there was a round of about several hundred energy audits, and less than half of those got implemented. Recently, one of my students in Colombia was telling me about the very low implementation rate of energy audits in Colombia. I was in Mauritius not so long ago. Again, I had the same story. Energy audits aren't being implemented. In fact, everywhere I go and ask the question, I ask about it in Brazil, audit implementation rates, and invariably the answer is they're low. And why is that? Why energy audits don't get implemented? I'm going to classify this into two areas. We'll look at what happens before the energy audit and then what happens after the energy audit. So before the energy audit, and this is the one that's often neglected, I feel, and it's critical. It's very important that this happen before the audit. Reasons that energy audits don't get implemented often start before the audit. One of these reasons is the client actually doesn't understand what energy audit is. They're not really sure what they're getting into. Maybe the government's told them they have to do an energy audit. Or maybe the government's got some grant funding and thought, oh yeah, that'd be nice to get some grant funding, get an energy audit done and learn about how we can save energy. Or maybe they just heard that it's a good idea and they happen to have a bit of spare money. What they don't understand is that an energy audit doesn't save you energy. It's just advice. What they also don't understand is that saving energy is not free, and the energy audit is going to tell them to spend time and money, and perhaps possibly quite a lot of time, possibly quite a lot of money, in order to save energy. And most organisations simply are not prepared to do so. They don't understand that they need to do so before they commission the audit. And when they get the audit report, it fails because they don't have the organisational commitment to move forward with it. So I want to give an analogy which I like to give, which is where if you were building a new home and you got an architect to design blueprints for that home, plans for that home, you'd only really be commissioning the architect to develop those plans or blueprint if you had an idea of how much the home would cost and you'd actually told the architect, look, this is my budget, you need to build a house that I can build for this much money. And you had a time frame for when you want it to be built and you knew what you want it to look like. Now, the blueprints actually don't build the home. They just show you how to build the home. An energy audit actually doesn't save the client any energy. It just tells them what they need to do to save energy. But if the client's gone into the energy audit without having a budget to implement the audit's advice, without having a time frame, without knowing or how much they've got available to spend and what payback period they need to achieve, things like that. Once they get the energy audit report, they're probably not going to be any more prepared than they were before the audit to move ahead. All they know before the audit, they didn't know how much they need to spend. After the audit, they do know how much they need to spend, but they actually haven't made that commitment beforehand to spend the money to get the energy efficiency upgrades. I hope you're getting this analogy. It's a little bit subtle, but it's really important. The best clients, the ones who are going to move ahead, your audit recommendations, are those who are already committed to implement energy efficiency upgrades, and they just want your advice to know how to best spend that money. And this kind of leads on to the second one, which is related, which is something you need to address pre-audit, is that the client thinks it costs nothing to save energy. So somehow they've got this mythical opinion, and they may have heard it from a saying that, and I just want to illustrate this, there's a saying that energy efficiency is a bit like pulling, it's like picking money up off the floor. You just pick the money up off the floor. Yep, that's that easy. That's how easy it is to save energy. And that's all I need to do. The energy audit's going to tell me how to pick that money off the floor. Gosh, I want an energy audit. Not true. Not true. Yeah, you're going to have to spend money, wastage that the energy audit identifies. Yep, some of that could be quite expensive to fix. Could have a great, good long-term payback, but it's going to cost you money. And then there's also the myth, the no-cost savings measures that the energy auditor might identify. For example, air conditioning systems that should be turned off earlier than they are. It doesn't take much to change the operating schedule. I think that the savings from that will somehow pay for all the capital measures. But that assumes that they've got access to that budget and that they're tracking it properly and that the capital measures actually aren't that expensive. And often they're quite expensive. Don't get me wrong, you're going to get good savings, but, and I'm sure you know that if you've done energy audits, but you do need to put effort in. You really need to address this up front before you do the energy audit. Say, hey, I'm going to be telling you to spend time and spend money. And if you're not prepared to do this, perhaps we should focus on other things rather than doing an energy audit right now. Perhaps, for example, we should be focusing on getting greater commitment in your organisation to setting aside a budget for energy efficiency upgrades and setting aside a staff member to manage it. And this then is related to the third one. So these are all interrelated, but they're all pre-audit. Is that the client wants to save energy, but isn't committed to saving energy. So, for example, let's say I wanted to run a marathon. Okay, so wanting to run a marathon is things like talking a lot about marathons, maybe watching people run a marathon, maybe starting to walk a bit so I can get up my fitness. Being committed to running a marathon, and is maybe sending a time frame, depending on your age. You might say, okay, I'm going to give myself a year or 2 years to train up to that point. And this is my training program, and this is how much I'm going to be spending on shoes, and I'll probably need to go to the physio occasionally, so I need to put a budget aside for it. And particularly, I'll need to put a lot of time. I'm going to need to think of how it's going to impact on my work and my family, and so on. So I hope you're seeing the difference here. It's a bit like my blueprint and architect analogy. You got to be dealing with clients to get to the point where they're committed to saving energy, not just wanting to save energy. So before you do the energy audit, educating, so-called educating the client pre-audit is critical. So if you think that the business isn't ready for an energy audit by asking them questions about what's your budget, what's your time frame, what are your constraints, you should be prepared to offer another service. As I mentioned, that could be a service about just helping the executive team better understand energy efficiency and its potential, so thus they're more willing to engage in an energy audit. Maybe it's looking at helping them set up an energy management system, and an energy management system where the organisation decides that managing energy is important to it. It starts to set some targets. And for example, if the organisation wanted to adopt ISO 50001 energy management systems, then they'd have to set a performance improvement target. So that's before the audit. Now let's look at the barriers to energy audit implementation after the audit. Now, one of the barriers is that they don't have the financing or the people resources available to implement the audit. Now, I've just talked for 5 or 10 minutes about that. You should have managed this pre-audit. If you're only asking these questions at the end of the audit or after you've done the audit, you've made a mistake. Now, I realise that pre-audit, it's not that perhaps comfortable to talk about what their budget is to implement, or they may say, oh, I'm just relying on the energy audit. You've got to be a little bit pushy there and say this is my experience with energy audits, they don't get implemented if you've only got wishful thinking, if you don't have a firm budget and so on. Try to push them a bit. and say, look, you can even say, look, I'm not really that comfortable asking you these questions, but I want to provide value to you. In order to provide value to you, I need you to know what you're going to get and what you're not going to get from the energy audit. So have that conversation, and I think you'll be much better positioned. Okay, but now let's look at some genuine issues after the audit that the client will have. Number one that the client may not mention and may feel a little bit ashamed to mention is that, you know what? They actually don't trust the advice in the energy audit. I just better whisper that. They don't trust the advice in the energy audit. Shock, horror, they don't trust the advice that you provided. Why may they not trust the advice you provided? Possibly you've done the energy audit and then they've gone to their local electrician and gone to their electrician who's worked for them for the last 10 years, their electrical contractor, and the electrical contractor says, no, that's rubbish. So even though the electrical contractor may be wrong, perhaps they've got more influence than you do. So during the audit, you're going to have to start to manage these relationships with contractors and find out who the trusted advisors are of the business and pull them into the energy audit process, get them buying into the energy audit by asking for their opinion, by bouncing ideas off them. You could even ask for a budget upfront for you to engage, for the client to allocate some contractor hours to work with you, so that then you started to deal with these things about lack of trust proactively during the audit. The other thing that doesn't engender trust is, in actual fact, in the energy audit industry, unfortunately, has a bit of a reputation for over-promising savings and underestimating costs. I see a lot of energy audits come across my desk, and it's a very common problem, unfortunately. Savings have been overestimated and the costs underestimated, perhaps even by a factor of 2 or so. The business case is actually a lot weaker than is actually presented. So as an energy auditor, you obviously want to look good by showing that you can deliver a lot of savings. I want you to put that ego aside, and from the start, I think you need to be saying, look, energy efficiency is portrayed as being a lot easier than it is. Remember the dollar bill analogy? It's actually not that easy. It's going to require a bit of effort. In the long term, you're going to get a really good benefit, but you may not be able to get those really fast paybacks that perhaps you've been led to believe. And now, if you're open and transparent and honest with the constraints in your energy audit and perhaps some of the assumptions you've made, you're going to start to build up more trust with that. But another problem is that the energy audit's advice is not clear. The business case is not clear. It's buried against a whole lot of technical information. Now, if you're an engineer like I am, when you're doing an energy audit, you really want to demonstrate that you've done a thorough job by showing all your calculations and workings. Now, that's great. You should be doing good calculations and workings, but the place for them is for them to be in an annex or maybe even just as a separate spreadsheet that's available to the client. You don't necessarily need to have a 100-page document of which 90 pages are just calculations and assumptions and measurements and things like that, all written down in painful detail. And with perhaps your recommendations right in the little table at the bottom. It's burying the good news. So you want to make sure that the business case is clear and also that any risks that are adequately addressed. So a good way to do this is while you're doing the energy audit, start discussing what your recommendations will be and start getting your client to help you draft those recommendations in a way that's going to get buy-in and addresses the risks that likely your client, the energy user, will possibly understand better than you. For example, they may be really adverse to site shutdowns. So you need to think, how can we do this upgrade so that it aligns with an existing shutdown? And then you lay that out in the energy audit report. So it's clear that you're not going to cause disruption because the upgrades will be coinciding with another site shutdown. So you need to have that business case clear, but also the implementation pathway very clear. This is just a short view perspective on what you can do to get better implementation of energy audits. So to summarize, firstly, you need to, before the audit, make sure that you have a clear scope, and the clear scope needs to be really based on the client being committed to implement energy efficiency upgrades, not just wanting to implement energy efficiency upgrades. And commitment meaning they've got budget and they've got some constraints that you need to work within, such as payback periods and time. And the second part is you need to be providing good quality, trustworthy advice that they can really rely on and know that if they follow your advice, that the costs and benefits are going to be more or less as you stated. Now, if you want to go and learn a bit more, consider taking the investment grade energy auditor training set and certification exams. And you'll see a link below this video, which gives you links to where you can learn more about that certification program and where you can even access some free lessons.